Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that was random.
Exceptional Radio.
Okay. I'm sorry about that. I forgot.
Oh, no worries, man.
I forgot to turn something on. So it's a new year, and it seems to me that COVID is supposed to be still this thing. I got this warning about Omicron, what, XBB.1.5 something or other. It's spreading across North America. But I was on the road. I was driving around between Christmas and New Year's, and there was, it was just packed. It was holiday travel season. And it seemed like, I think I maybe seen maybe 2 or 3 people wearing a mask in walking out of like gas stations.
I still see people wearing masks, which is like, it's easy to like not wear a mask.
Yeah.
So I understand like going into places not masked. But the issue is how frequently people actually go into public, because then it's like the person that's going into an airport with no mask is not the same as the person who's going into like a gas station at 11 p.m. with no mask.
Yeah, on like an interstate.
It's just not the same. Yeah, it's just not the same level of exposure, which is like, not to say that one is necessarily safe, but it's like, it's easy to like drop your guard when you're in your neighborhood, but when you're like traveling, or if you have to travel like for a job or something, it's like, that's when I'm like, I don't go places where I would need a mask, is what it comes down to. And that's kind of where like, there's like a birthday party last week or some shit, and it's like, I just didn't go because I'm like, I'm not trying to get sick while pretending there's no pandemic to make it feel like, oh, we got a chance to have a celebration. It's like, this is not the fucking time. It's just not the time. So I don't, on the one hand, I understand when people like want to do the same shit that they used to do before people would like die from meeting in large groups. But between like shootings and the pandemic, it's like, I just have no desire to go out in public and be like out in among people. It's just, I don't anymore. It feels like a chore. Like if I'm not getting paid to go somewhere, I don't want to be out because it's so dangerous. It's just, there's not enough guarantee that somebody won't have a gun or somebody won't have a fucking infectious disease to the point where I'm like, I'm just going to stay home. There's no point in
guns. Dude, a 6-year-old shot a teacher the other day. You read about that crap? Holy crap.
That's where it's like, you can't, there's fucking nowhere. I mean, I think it was in their home.
How did they get it into the school? Just brought it in? I guess there aren't metal detectors at a elementary.
Was it at the, I thought it just, the way they phrased it, like, I thought it was their offspring, but maybe it wasn't.
No,
it just seemed like it wasn't in school.
It was in school. It was like in the school, in a classroom. Kids were out, like some kids were in recess, others weren't. They all got holed up in various rooms while they did the, de-escalation of the situation. And I think the teacher, she got shot. It was like a life-threatening type wound. So she was in surgery for who knows how long until they stabilized her. But some 6-year-old got a hold of a gun, got it into school, and shot their teacher. That's where we are now. This isn't like the first time it's happened. Apparently, but one of the first times that it's happened in a can't see my air quotes, controlled environment.
Well, that's just like there was another live shooter at Greenwood Mall again. And it's like, that shit is so close to us in the sense of like, it's not like down the street, but in terms of,
I mean, it's kind of down the street.
I mean, pretty much it's down a street, relative to somebody in Los Angeles, they would be like, oh yeah, that's down the street.
Yeah.
But in Bloomington, that's like, it's a city. It's just a couple cities over. Realistically.
It's a 45-minute drive. So that's like, that's more than just down the street.
But it's a place you might be.
Yeah.
And that's the craziest part is like somebody might go to Greenwood Mall for a specific thing. Like whether it's like food related or like shopping related, like it's like, not to say the greatest mall or anything like that, but the issue is different malls have different stores to a certain degree, where you just might need a certain thing and end up at Greenwood Mall because that's the closest place that has something that you need. So it's like, to be in a situation where like going out puts you in a potential shooting zone because it's happened multiple times within the past 2 years, it's like, it's easier just not to go out. And in the sense of like, you can't know where the fucking active shooter's gonna end up, even down to when they were overreacting to that. I still think probably not active shooter in Bloomington. They still said there was, in terms of like, well, now if you're anywhere between First Street and like 10th Street, you might be near an active shooter. That's in fucking Bloomington. So America just makes it impossible to actually go anywhere because people are so flippant about their health in terms of like contracting infectious diseases. And then the shooting is just like, man, I used to, I mean, it wasn't that I wasn't aware of it before, but the amount that I would leave before is just, it's exponential compared to how infrequently I leave now, in terms of like, I just have no desire to die early for fucking no reason. In terms of like, anytime you leave and go out into America, you really might die for no fucking reason. And that's something that I don't think people really like have come to terms with, in the sense of like, that was what America used to not be like. And that's why in the 90s we had a sense of like a false sense of safety, in that in reality anybody can like be in their home and like the Idaho killer or whatever can come in. No one's safe really anywhere, but you can create barriers in terms of your abode that make it somewhat safer than when you're out in public. And that's where like the capacity to create those barriers is just like, once they're removed, Americans are just so unconcerned about death that it ends up becoming dangerous to be around them. And that's why I think it's like, America is like a really dangerous place because people are so lax about their awareness, or lax about their existence, because in many cases like people just don't care. Like a lot of the people who don't care about getting COVID or like the flu probably smoke cigarettes a lot, and or shit like drink alcohol a lot. Not to say that just doing those activities is like completely self-destructive, but in the sense of like, when somebody is just not concerned about, oh, this thing's going to give me cancer, or this activity is going to put me at risk of dying. Like when people do shit like the Jackass or CKY stunts, where they're like, oh, I'm going to get in a shopping cart and go down a flight of stairs. Like, why? Really? I mean, the things that, the self-destruction that a lot of people have put themselves through for attention because they actually don't care about living or dying is like, it's really it's an indication of how useless humanity is, in terms of like our existence is just completely wasted Like, we're, as a unit, we're wasting our existence. We're just fucking wasting it away on like figuring out ways to die faster and die unnecessarily. And so there's this like, when that is like what governments spend the money on, as an individual, it becomes really, what's the word? You're not really motivated to try to overcome it, in that there are so many different forces invested in the destruction of humanity, in what they believe to be their righteous idea of the way humanity should be. Then it becomes like paralyzing for a lot of people. So then they just like medicate themselves into being able to deal with it so they don't have to kill themselves. But in the process, it's like, it's hard to realize that that can't go on forever, because it feels like it's been going on for so long. But that's part of the way propaganda works. And like the way that specifically people like Joe Rogan create this military industrial lens through which history is always viewed. It's like, if you only view history through a military industrial, it's really easy to get like depressed and wrapped up in the notion that humanity is on a destructive path. But it's actually super recent, and like, it's not really the brunt of humanity. And it's hard to like remember that, in terms of, if you look at the size of the militaries of all the largest countries, they're actually really small in terms of like how many people participate in those things. But then it just like puts everyone else in this sort of hostage situation, because we know those people will blow everything up if they don't win in their mind. And that's why it's like, we have to coexist along with these people who are willing to like end the game for everybody if they don't win, which is like counter.
I'm going to take my ball home.
Right. And I'm going to take everybody's ball home.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to fucking stick a knife in the ball and then kick the ball over the fence
into that yard with a really nasty dog.
Yeah. And that's the type of people we have to coexist with, who also then end up in charge of the government. So it's like, it's really, really difficult to not think of humanity as having a single type of disposition, because our government is so consistent with the propaganda to impose the military industrial mind. But in that, it's like, remember, I don't know if you necessarily remember, but there was a point where we were being gaslit into thinking that people were going to nuke each other, in terms of like Russia and the United States, because it's not individual. It's these governments. They're like, oh, these two fucks and a couple of like fucking brown-nosing fucks have the capacity to make this decision on behalf of entire nations who are considering, or supposedly considering, pressing that nuke button. Where I'm like, this is where, again, you have to just like look away from it. You can't look at it, because that's the whole story or the allegory behind fucking Sodom and Gomorrah. It's like, don't look at the fucking nuke. If you don't look at it and keep your head turned away, nobody's gonna fucking turn to salt, because it's just a matter of
salt.
How much attention you focus on these things and how much attention you give them. But if you get all riled up and talk about nukes and keep thinking that they're gonna nuke when that suggestion gets brought, well, eventually they're gonna fucking start testing we'll do this small tactical nuke, and it's like, oh, it's not a mother of all bombs. It's just a small it's a tactical. So
it's tactical. It's precise.
You know, it was only these facilities were, you know, there are a few casualties, but it was tactical nukes. As long as people don't feel the propaganda, then it kind of goes away. And in terms of like, I see people who are on the verge of having their quote unquote cancellations happen, and then they just stop doing anything, and then America just forgets about it, and then they come back. Like when Louis C.K. was like this close to never ever doing anything again, he just stopped. It's like he just froze in place.
Wait, he was the dick whipper outer, right?
Yeah.
God.
Which again, it's like it's almost difficult to remember what he even did. He was not just a dick whipper outer, a chronic dick whipper outer who did it to comedians as like what it became, this sort of like weird rite of passage for anybody who was like doing shows around him.
Oh.
So it was so protected in that circle that it was like a chronic thing. So that's where, again, it's like when Louis C.K. was on the verge of losing his career, he just stopped. And then, like, I think like 2 or 3 years later, he just acted like, oh no, he didn't act like this shit. Never. He started making fun of it. And then it became part of his act. And then everybody just kind of forgave him or whatever. I don't know how that works. But then he's like doing shows again. But it's his little, it's like a closed circuit. You don't see him necessarily.
Man, what a weird expression of like
follow him.
Owning
you could go
something.
See him if you wanted to.
But that's such a strange way to own something so it can't hurt you. What the fuck?
Or Brian Callen, or that Chris D'Elia dude. I don't know how to say it, but he got in trouble again because he never went away. So it's like these comedians, which is like, comedy's so dumb now. Like, as somebody who used to enjoy comedy shows, like the idea that I would go sit and watch somebody be funny, it just feels so stupid now. Like, I can just talk to my friends. Eventually somebody's gonna say some funny shit. I don't need to go pay somebody to like give me this like canned fucking half friend experience while I'm just listening and laughing. And it's like anymore, that's what it feels like a comedy show is. It's for like people who don't have funny friends, or like people who don't. You don't even have to be fucking funny. Eventually, some funny shit's gonna be said. It's like funny stuff happens, like on its own, and that's what's so.
I think what's going on with
about people who try to force shit is like funny stuff just happens, and you just have to be like witty enough to observe that something funny is happening or there's a funny scenario and point it out.
I think there's some element of like the church effect, where it changes the dynamic for like what the group decides is amusing or not. And so whomever the lowest common denominator who represents the LCD, they're actually the ones who get to decide when the laughing begins. And because it's infectious and not everyone can resist, laughter, is because it's fun. Laughing is fun. We like laughing. But it's hard to, resist that. And then next thing you know, you're laughing at shit that's not actually funny, or you're laughing and it's just, wait, what was that? Wasn't even funny. I'm just laughing now. I don't even remember what was, that's my dilemma with comedy shows, is at some point just not interesting to me anymore.
Yeah, it's like
I want stories that challenge my imagination, though, and most comedy shows, unless they get developed into like a movie, which is rare. We're talking like 30 seconds to 5-minute bits. Occasionally you get some like meta bit that runs the entirety of their show, but that's also pretty rare. I'm just not the audience for stand-up comedy, though. I want complicated stories with weird details.
Which is where, like, I used to go to Dave Chappelle shows. Like, I used to be his audience, which is weird to think in terms of if you look back now with a more clear eye, his content hasn't actually changed all that much. But that's the problem, is he hasn't changed with the times, and he doesn't want to change with the times, which then makes it difficult to keep listening to him when the times change and his comedy stays the same. So that's why, I used to listen to fucking Joe Rogan's podcast. I used to Joe Rogan's comedy wasn't the greatest when I was listening to his podcast, but I would listen to it on Pandora, and ever so often he would make a almost like laugh out loud joke. It's just more amusing things that like are like, oh, this would be kind of funny. It's not really like gut busting laughing, and he tries to take it over the top with the Sam Kinison yelling, and some people fall for it. So that's where, like, if you don't react to the like exaggerated yelling and like humping and unnecessary like butt dragging on the ground and these stupid things that he does to like make his comedy more physical and more exaggerated in the way of Sam Kinison, which is fucking terrible, then it's not going to be funny at all. But there's like a whole bunch of knuckle dragging fucks that think that shit's hilarious. And that's why he has a $200 million empire, whatever, however much he's worth. In terms of like, there's a bunch of dumb people who think Joe Rogan is like the funniest person ever. But I even like because I would be on his, what's it called? The forum. The forum was more so the hub as to why people, I think, got so wrapped up in his podcast, because he would be on there posting for a while, like I think for like the first 10 years. And so I think I joined his forum in like 2011, maybe like 2010. I don't remember exactly when, but like around that time was right when he started getting really big not really big. It was like he became niche popular from people who knew him from like either Fear Factor or UFC. And it wasn't really, I'm trying to think. There's like oh,
that's right. He was the host of Fear Factor.
Well, but he was also on what's that show with Phil Hartman and Andy Dick? Radio, some fucking stupid show. It wasn't stupid. Let me
Talk Radio.
Talk Radio. He was on a show that was like, it wasn't bad. He just happened to be on a team of like all-stars, and it like boosted his performance in a way that then ended up getting him in like a place that he never really should have been, to be honest. Like Joe Rogan was never a great actor. He was kind of funny. He was never like laugh out loud funny. He just happened to be friends with Phil Hartman and Andy Dick in the primes of their career, which in the process, then he became on like a TV show with them. I don't know which one came first. Regardless, it doesn't actually matter. It's that when he got in this position of like, not to say that he didn't put in the work, it's more so he kind of like lucked into not having so much talent, but getting jobs that you don't actually need that much talent. Like, you don't need a huge amount of talent to be the Fear Factor host. Like, when Ludacris was the Fear Factor host, it was no different than when Joe Rogan was the Fear Factor host in reality. So, like, anybody who can read a fucking teleprompter and kind of like know when to do the right vocal intonation can be a Fear Factor host. Like, it doesn't take a whole lot of emotional intelligence or quantitative intelligence to host Fear Factor, from what I can tell. Not to say that Ludacris isn't talented. What I'm getting at is,
yeah, Ludacris
Joe
is hella
Rogan,
talented.
Yeah, Ludacris is super talented. Not to take anything away from Ludacris in the comparison. It's just he happened to be the person who hosted Fear Factor.
No,
or like,
what we're saying is this is a game.
No.
A top game show host is like a cake
Have you
job.
ever seen Total Blackout?
No.
So Jaleel White hosted this show called Total Blackout. He was fucking awesome at it, actually, in a way that, like, when you can tell the difference between somebody who's like enjoying their job, like Joe Rogan, I'm sure he enjoyed Fear Factor, but Jaleel White didn't need to do Total Blackout at the time he did. And it was just like, you could tell he was just really having fun doing that show. And I think it kind of like flopped because it wasn't, what's the word? It wasn't really promoted all that much. But in terms of like the timing, there was just so much programming for like reality and game shows that it probably just kind of fell through the cracks. Anyway, he was a really good host. He's like a good actor in terms of like, Joe Rogan's not a great actor. He's okay. But Jaleel White's at least a good actor, which then translates into a better natural sounding teleprompter reader. And that's where there's like levels to acting. When you see it, you know that there's difference.
I mean,
and
which
is also, sorry, go ahead.
I always thought Jaleel White was incredible because he
is fucking.
His range between like just in one show between Steve and Stefan, like,
he's one of the most underrated, really amazing actors to ever act, and
like,
that's why
that episode though when he came out of the machine and was Stefan, and he had that, and like he had a completely different personality, kind of. It was like a mirror universe personality that emerged, and his posture and everything about it was like, is this like, wait a second, this dude that I've been watching on Family Matters for the past however many seasons is, what the crap?
even the fact that he can make you believe that he shouldn't be something that he actually wasn't.
Yeah.
Like the fact that in everybody's mind, Jaleel White was Steve Urkel until Stefan Urkel was like, oh, I guess this dude probably isn't. I mean, he acted that part so well, then everybody's mind, that's who he was.
Yeah.
That's why that's why everybody called Family Matters Urkel. Nobody called that shit fucking Family Matters. Everybody called that shit Urkel after season 3, or probably season 2. From season 2 on, it's like, that's why everybody called it Urkel, because he became that character in such a way that you loved as the audience to see his character do things that were unexpected for someone of that demographic at the time, which is also where, like, it's hard to remember. Steve Urkel was like the hard juxtaposition of an image to like gangster shit that was everywhere, in terms of like every black person was like a thug. Even like they had to transition Eddie from, like, he was never a thug, but he was like a dumb jock in a way that
Yeah, he was always on the path of becoming a sports bro.
But also on the cusp of like being jumped into a gang or something. There was like, you know, episodes where it's like the Dragons or some stupid shit where they're trying to like get Eddie into a gang, and it's like, if it was like a Chicago family in the early '90s, that's not out of. They're not gonna be called the fucking Dragons or some stupid shit like that. But it's very possible that Eddie Winslow would end up like a vice lord or a gangster disciple or some shit like that. You're like, it's super possible. Even Urkel might have ended up a fucking vice lord.
Oh, Urkel totally would have become a vice lord
in the right scenario. And that's where I'm like, in actual Chicago in the early '90s. So
no, I mean, it makes perfect sense. Just think about the way he behaved, like in any situation, like completely fearlessly. Nobody actually messed with him. I mean, they did, but not in a meaningful way.
No, I mean, well, but that's when
he was also smart enough to avoid that shit.
Pull out that Bruce Lee persona. But there was like an episode where Laura bought a gun and shit, and like, somebody at the school got shot, like, which is very believable for being in Chicago, but for Family Matters, it was like they had to put it in there because that's what white people wanted to think of black people in general at the time. And it's like there's no there was no media allowing black people to be anything but that stereotype at the time, which so Steve Urkel, I mean, okay, there was like Star Trek with Geordi. That's about it. Anyway, Steve Urkel coming out of this weird left field place where it's like nobody really wants to be that nerdy, but it was such a juxtaposition of what was available for black imagery that I think people latched onto it. So it's like when you got the black version of Full House, basically, like everybody in the black sphere is going to sort of boost it in terms of like the last time they had that was the Huxtables, and that hadn't gone away. I think the Huxtables were thriving at that point. In terms of like popularity.
So is Steve the Gibbler then?
Basically, they basically made him Kimmy Gibbler. Wow. If you, I mean, they even did a crossover at some point with Full House. Like they straight up did a crossover, which they don't do enough of those anymore. And it has to be chemically organic, if that makes any sense in terms of like Green Lantern and Star Trek. That's the type of crossover where I'm like, you take two things that you wouldn't necessarily think would go together, but then when you put them together, it's like, oh, okay. Full House and fucking Family Matters makes perfect sense to go together. Considering what was it?
So it looks like the Arrowverse is like the most
Perfect Stranger spinoff anyway.
Yeah.
So then technically, because Family Matters crossed over with Full House, Perfect Strangers and and Full House are in the same universe.
Okay.
Technically now.
I mean, there are
I don't know if anybody's ever put that together.
There's a almost looks okay. So I just pulled up this thing about TV.
I don't know if you realize that Perfect Strangers beget Family Matters.
No, I did because the dad was like one of the regular reoccurring characters, right?
Harriet was the elevator woman.
I thought the dad was in it.
He was on there. I think he was on there too. But Harriet was the elevator woman.
Oh, that's funny.
She was the crux of how.
And so how does Perfect Strangers and Full House cross paths?
I mean, just through
Existing in the same
Family
universe.
Matters.
Okay, just Family Matters.
Because Family Matters is a Perfect Stranger spinoff when Steve Urkel crosses over and goes into the Full House that technically pulls Perfect Strangers into the Full House universe by proxy.
Man, so I wonder how many of those TV shows.
Because then there's like, what is it? Empty Nest was there's two Golden Girls spinoffs. There's Empty Nest, and then what I just found out, like Golden Tower or something, but it only got one season.
Let's see.
Regardless.
Oh man, there's more. There's a bunch of like shows that all felt like they were in the same universe. There was a show about a family, and it was like a reboot or a redo of Brady Bunch, but in Minnesota. I can't remember what that show was. It was pretty terrible. I think Suzanne Summers was in it.
Well, this isn't actually a bad comparison to make in terms of like Jaleel White. I don't know what his net worth is, but I do feel like his career has been long. I think it's been longer than Joe Rogan's, but it has been as relevant in terms of like he recently
8 million.
It's got to be more than that because I know he recently launched Purple Urkel weed,
10 million,
and then they paid him for like an appearance from Triller or some shit to like promote it. So like I know he probably made $1 million off of that because they were throwing stupid fucking money at people, which is like okay if they're reporting his net worth at 10 million, I would imagine it's probably more like 30, but he just doesn't report it. Whereas like,
I mean, this is Steve Urkel we're talking about. He probably knows how to take advantage.
He had so many fucking residuals and royalties, which is where I'm like, I can't imagine a show that's like still in syndication. You know what I mean? It's like still in syndication. You're telling me he's not making money off of that still in a way where I'm like, I don't think he ever had like a drug period or like a bunch of cars or.
Wow, this show is 33 years old. Holy crap. That was a long time ago.
At the peak, he was earning almost $200,000 per episode, which is like $4 million per season. So I'm like, yeah, because it says he's made millions off of the returns alone. It says it's just. I'm sure he obscures
9 seasons.
Yeah, I'm sure he obscures it for the sake of not having, or in terms of like how he gets it, it's probably done in such a way that if he gets
9 seasons
every year instead of 100 million one year, then he can keep his. If he like gets it and then spends it, he can like accumulate hundreds of $1 million worth of assets without ever making more than $10 million a year. So that's where I'm like, I feel like he's smart enough as to not like jump his net worth on paper in a way that Joe Rogan's not, which is why you see these people where like Joe Rogan's mansion or something was listed at like 7 million, or I don't know. It's like they have individual assets that are worth millions of dollars that then puts them on the IRS's radar. So that's where I'm like, Joe Rogan feels like a person who accidentally got rich rather than a person who knew what they were doing. Because if you look at like the alpha brain and the
Alpha brain. Alpha.
the fuck. What? Well, they were
Alpha,
also doing the
Alpha
like
brain sounds like
kettlebells and shit.
Alpha
Like,
brain
there's no
sounds like
way
a
they're still
fucking.
selling kettlebells.
It sounds like a topical scalp treatment for people who have hair loss. That sucks.
I mean, it's funny. I think it's like it's not even really. Let me think how to say this. It would be great if meritocracy were the way things worked, but it's just more reflective of how we're not in anything close to a meritocracy. So when it calls itself a meritocracy, that's part of the propaganda, because then you see this like nepo baby discussion where famous people are trying to compare like having famous families to working like a plumbing job. But it's like, even if you're a plumber, you have to fucking take a test and you have to get certified and
you have to get a license.
You can't just
You have to be bonded and insured. Well,
which is like,
you can, but I don't think you can get like actual insurance.
And then they'd be like, well, you have to get into the actors union. And it's like, yeah, exactly. So in terms of the barriers that are put up, someone who's already in it has easier access to getting past those barriers than somebody whose family doesn't know what the fuck they're doing. So it's like, on the one hand, when you're given proof that the meritocracy isn't even remotely close to being real, then it's like, it's not. It's easier not to be like down on oneself for not getting the same return as it appears someone else is getting for either putting in the same amount or less work. But it's because it's not a meritocracy and work does not translate into returns, that I think it's easier to do work when you're like, I don't necessarily respect a return on this, but maybe I'll get a return eventually. But that's where the necessity of having to like pay bills then makes it difficult to like know when to apply like, you have to pay bills, you have to work, but it's like, which work do you want to do? It's like, are you going to do work that ends up enriching somebody else at your expense? Or is it work that is going to be mostly your benefit? And that's kind of like, at any given point, it's, if one does a monitor to see where the benefit of their work is going, it's like, yeah, you can really easily tell when you're being exploited. And that's kind of where it's not impossible, or it's near impossible to like do things without being exploited in an economy that's based around exploitation. But it's about managing, like, how much are you being exploited? And I think that's where once more people, and you see it with Generation Z, like more people are managing their exploitation and making it more difficult to become the subject of exploitation. Just like in terms of whether it's like not accepting cookies where you don't need to, or not downloading the free app that you don't need to, that's going to monitor your data or whatever, you know, it's little steps here and there, not downloading TikTok or not.
So this is kind of
hosting.
interesting. I was reading this article. It it was talking about job sector development and which job sectors are getting development, and then there was also a gender breakdown across it all. But in general, there is a decline in growth in service industries like mechanics and plumbers and HVAC technicians, and all the what do you call it, skilled trades that people need licensing for, like electricians. And so these numbers are down, but all and the industries that are experiencing the growth, it's like healthcare, administration, education, like that kind of stuff. I think there's it spells the acronym HEAL. I can't remember what the L is. Anyways, it's interesting to me because similarly, there's also a decline in interest in things like social media, and it's kind of the decline is kind of on an age range thing. Like now, it seems that younger people are less interested in computers than previous generations, and essentially, the interest in computing is like peaked at some point. Before we even started using computers. Well, maybe around the time we started using computers, but that's like the real peak of it. And then it of course, the mainstream catches up to it. And now we've got these psychotic GPUs that no one can afford that can output resolutions for displays that nobody owns, and and that there's no content to watch on those gigantic high resolution displays either. I don't know. It's just interesting to me that we've got a new generation of computer users that aren't really even interested in using the computers. And the software that's available to create the programs that are being used today are they're so simplified that nobody really wants to do coding anymore. I'm sure that's just an oversimplification. And I really, I really attempted to neuter that. It's not that nobody wants to do the coding. It's that there are a lot of tools that make it really easy. And so a lot of applications feel the same and look the same. And a lot of it's being made for mobile devices. I remember when there used to be a glut of freeware or shareware or freemium type software that actually did stuff at the free level, and it seems more and more that those applications are I'm talking about desktop software. These applications are being pushed more and more into you got to pay for them. They're not even the free version of it. It only exists for 10 days, or you can only use it 10 times, or you can only there's an extreme limitation. They're you got to buy it if you want to keep using it type deal. And so in the past, we had pages of options, pages of software options for a task, but it's a lot harder, I think, for people to make this software now. At least software that doesn't look like it was made on a tablet, because I don't think I know anybody who uses a desktop for anything like power user level software that wants to use software that looks like it was designed to be used on a tablet. That's just not what I'm into. That's not to say that there isn't tablet software that's very capable and can do a lot. But if I'm sitting at a desk, I don't want to be reaching out in front of me that's just mouse and keyboard, guys. Mouse and keyboard.
I think the mouse and keyboard were it's the pinnacle of design for interacting with information in a way that we want to over design when we have the capacity.
Yeah.
But it just becomes that there's
gestural interfaces just aren't there yet. A truly gesture-based interface just doesn't work.
If they
not yet.
I mean, I don't know if they ever will.
I don't think
know if
they
they ever
will
compared to the efficiency of a keyboard mouse, and that's the issue. Is not that they won't work. It's just that compared to the keyboard mouse combination, is there any sort of gesture set that can be superior to moving and manipulating objects and expressing nonverbal language? And I'm just not, I mean, I could be persuaded, but in terms of like, I've tried a lot of gestural interfaces, and the issue is the curve of muscle fatigue that goes along with it.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can like rest your arm and use, or both arms and use a keyboard or a mouse, makes it so much easier to use those things for like lengths of time that actually end up becoming harmful to the body, which is, that's a problem. But it's like, if you need to do work for long periods, it's like you'd rather have it that allows you to do 8 hours than something that it only allows you to do 2 hours.
Man, like sometimes those marathon debugging sessions last, 12, 16, 18 hours.
Right.
Because you got to fix whatever's going on.
You just wouldn't be able to do it with gestural.
Oh, God, no.
Control.
Your arms would give out. No, it would be impossible.
No way.
There's no way. Shoulders
After
would give
hour
out.
3, nobody's continuing without either massages or some sort of like methamphetamine.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nintendo pretty much nailed it with the Power Glove, and they only gave you a thumb and 2 fingers, and then kind of let you move around, but it was really in a fixed area. The Power Glove might be the most reliable and consistent gestural interface that I've ever used. But only because it wasn't so ambitious that it was trying to replicate,
Yeah, and I think that's why it was like consistent, but it was frustratingly restricted.
So
in
hard
terms
to use
of
sometimes.
how many gestures? Yeah,
It made us think that we were going to be able to use 2 fists and beat up Mike Tyson. Bastards.
Yeah, those commercials were super deceptive. They were super deceptive commercials.
There was another gesture interface. It was like a laptop. You lifted it open, and it had these 2 infrared planes, an X plane and a Y plane, and I guess it had a Z plane too, because you used both hands in front of it, and you could enter A, B, or your D-pad and controls. It was a very short-lived interface. But it failed.
Well, I had the Leap Motion at one point.
I had one of those too.
A very similar concept, and it's like the issue became ambient light would make it inaccurate. So it's like you could get some really accurate points, but it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon and the sun's shining in. Well, your hand's gonna reflect light differently, and now it doesn't work. So it's little things like that. Wear gloves. Well, you don't need to. That's not what it.
Oh man! When I had one of those things, like
meant to need.
I found that my monitor would interfere with it.
Yeah, that too.
It would create like a feedback loop. It would
interference would definitely was a problem of multiple types.
Like I remember the first time I saw it. It was the visualization app where you wave your hands and you see it on the screen what it could look like. And I remember I did that one time. The screen lit up, and then the whole thing just started lighting up. It was like a luminescent feedback loop. It was pretty cool, but it was also kind of weird. So I moved the thing further away, and it died. I had it way too close to basically a TV. But I was sitting, with the 4K monitor, you kind of have to get really close to it if you're using it as a computer monitor. I mean, you don't have to, but it's better. It's more fun.
Yeah. Well, and with those type, so the HoloLens is like a very much more expensive AR headset that like
Aren't those like
allows
$1,500 or something?
now they were used to be like $4,000. But it like projects the what's it called? The like LiDAR out from your face. So if your hands are in front, you can use the AR there. But it became so.
Oh, HoloLens 2 is $3,500.
Yeah. So it became like the hurdle for entrance is so high that nobody wants to.
$6,200.
Pay that much.
What the is wrong with these people? No one's going to adopt this. $6,000 just to have dumb-looking sunglasses?
Because then the gesture control is not worth $6,000, even if it's better. No. So it's like they haven't really caught on because of that cost hurdle, and it doesn't seem like anybody who's actually tried them is like adamant that the experience is worth. I mean, I don't know what they would say it's worth, but they're not touting it.
I think there's a point of diminishing returns with all this technology where it's kind of like, okay, great. So what is it used for? What do we do with it? How is this useful to anything? What does it actually improve? And if the answer requires like deep thought, Jack Handy level deep thought, like then maybe it's just kind of wasting time and resources. Like some of this stuff might not actually lead to anything useful other than a generation of people staring at freaking floating emojis in their office.
Yeah, a lot of it.
Like that's really disturbing. That computers aren't supposed to become traps. They're supposed to enable heightened productivity for a short period of time so you can focus on more interesting things. But it seems like it's more and more this stuff is just a holding pattern for people who aren't creative enough to come up with a real world tangible hobby. And I love computers. I love like the way that software allows the virtualization of hardware and can emulate hardware processes. I think that stuff's great. And I love that, we get these like incredible visualization machines that can show us different parts of the world at any time. That stuff's super cool. And with a really high level of detail and almost like uncanny valley piercing reality, it's quite impressive. But it's supposed to just be like an enhancement. It's not supposed to be like the focus of everything. Tools aren't supposed to be the life, right? And that's what it seems like. That's what it seems like. Cell phones have become. People are freaking super tribal about cell phones, and it's weird.
It's really weird. Really weird.
Like the Samsung tribe, most of them are okay. I gotta say, like my Samsung friends seem pretty cool, and I know a few people who have the OnePlus. They're convinced they've got the best device. They'll tell you all about it. And I have the basic iPhone, the entry level iPhone, because it's the smallest screen on a device that I have a lot of like apps ready to go on. So for me, I'm just kind of baked in because I was an early adopter and I don't feel like finding new software. Also, the one time I tried Android, I had a device that was gigantic and I could barely fit it in my pocket. And so that was probably a mistake on my part. It just turns out that small screens are not common anymore. Like, it's hard to find a small screen. It doesn't make any sense. You'd think smaller screen, it would be like easier to do, but it's actually harder because they have to cram even more crap into a tinier space. And that's where the premium cost comes from. Fucking bastards. Always ringing me for everything. I think that's the real problem with a lot of this, like this future tech, is that, yeah, it's great, fantastic, it does all this cool shit, but it's not actually going to be beneficial because nobody's going to buy it. And more importantly, where's the infrastructure to support this technology going to come from? Because if somebody's got two 4K displays in front of their eyes, that's a lot of data that has to be processed all the time. And that could be a lot of information that's being funneled into those screens. If someone's saying watching a movie or something like that. 4K displays if you're watching a movie in 4K or a TV series in 4K, that's a lot of data that's being consumed. I'm not sure that the world is even ready for things like 8K, and I know that 16K was, it was released not too long ago, like a couple of years ago. And then granted, there are no consumer 16K monitors. You still got to spend, loads and loads of cash. You've got to be a business, like a movie theater or something. But even then, the bandwidth requirements alone, I don't think that, just like our electrical needs for supporting an entirely electric vehicle future, the infrastructure for electricity isn't there. Well, our infrastructure for data isn't there either. If everyone tried to watch everything in 4K, everyone would be running into their freaking bandwidth cap. And I know this because I watched all of Game of Thrones in 4K, and it only took 2 weeks to eat through a terabyte of data, and I was actually pretty impressed. It was really beautiful in 4K, 60 frames per second. It's man, this is a fantastic experience. Everything's so crisp. Then I look at my data, it's oh shit, I can't even get an RSS feed now for 2 weeks.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So at that point,
I can only imagine.
So at that point, it's shit. I guess I'm going to be trickling the internet in on my phone for a couple of weeks. Let's see how this must be how the other side lives. But at the same time, it's possible to do that. And I'm usually pretty conservative about what I watch. I just didn't realize that the device I was consuming media through was consuming everything in 4K. That's my fault. Because I didn't think to look. But yeah, I don't think the world is ready for, or not the world, the United States information infrastructure is ready for everybody marathoning any TV show in 4K. Not when no,
definitely not.
Not when a 30-mile-an-hour gust of wind can interrupt a signal and cause if it's making my system, forcing my system to buffer, then it's probably forcing everyone else's system to buffer if they're in my neighborhood, because they're probably all enduring some trees in the wires too. Maybe I just need to get freaking fiber optic and have better internet service, but I don't think that's the solution either, because I've been at people's houses where they have fiber optics, and every time something happens, their internet pauses for a second and then it comes back online, and it could be an electrical system. There's a burp in the electrical grid. A transformer down the street farted. It could be any number of reasons, but the internet is so unstable. I just don't see a future for anything, at least not in the streaming microcosm. Maybe for people who are willing to spend money for a Blu-ray encoded with some 8K movie. But as far as I know, there's nothing except for user-generated content on YouTube. And only in the last couple of months have the big lens manufacturers started releasing high definition lenses that are capable of resolving detail at a high enough lines per inch that it makes sense to even use 8K, let alone 12K or 16K systems. This is really wild stuff. Up until literally a couple, maybe a year ago, there were no lenses out there that were capable of resolving fine detail that looked good in terms of photography or cinematography, videography. I think Canon just released their first ultra HD broadcast lens system, with like a super zoom that allows them to go from looking at the entire basketball court to focusing on the nose hairs of somebody at the opposite corner of the court type shit.
Like completely unnecessary.
Yeah, but those kinds of lenses didn't even exist until recently, which means that like the stuff that's being sold to consumers, it's like, oh great, I've got a consumer camera, but I don't have a lens that can resolve detail to a fine enough degree to make that kind of resolution even matter. And that's the kind of thing that they don't even tell us. Oh yeah, you have 8K sensor, but your lens is really only good to like 5K.
Well, an issue is like,
and if like if broadcast
huge emphasis on.
Go ahead.
Well, there's a huge emphasis on content creation, but there's not a huge emphasis on curation. So there's this influx of info, but none of it is good, and none of it is curated, and that's kind of where like I feel if curation doesn't come more into play, then information is going to like drown itself out eventually, and people aren't going to like be able to access anything in terms of finding what they're looking for. There's just too much noise.
So here's something that just occurred to me. Everything that was made in the film era can still be transferred to a higher resolution. It can always be rescanned into a higher resolution digital transfer. But anything created after the digital revolution, anything that was hard encoded in 720p or 720i or 1080i or 1080p, et cetera, going on up, anything that was captured at a lower digital resolution will never be able to experience a true resolution improvement. No matter how good the AI gets, it's always going to be like guesstimating on some airy disk that occurs within a pixel area. And it's never going to be truly accurate. It's always going to have noise. It's always going to look like claymation, basically. The best it'll look like is really smooth claymation, but it'll always have weird noise because it'll just have to overcome, 1/4, 1/16, 1/32 or 1/64 resolution in terms of what it's trying to bring back to life or interpolate. And so there's actually going to be several generations of television that we're going to lose at some point because it's just going to look so bad on super high resolution displays. It'll become unwatchable. Kind of like a lot of the television that was of low quality, like in the 80s, that when they rescan, it just looks bad. But when it was done on film, that stuff always comes out looking, at least it comes out looking like it was done on film. They just get more of the details of the film stock itself, like dust or scratches or signs of age being used.
Well, and that's where like the Library of Congress Preservation Project really comes in handy. So, I think it's funny that we're getting to a point where studios are taking content out of circulation because it seems like it's not profitable or whatever for them to keep it up, or I don't know what the idea is behind it, but it's very possible that some of these companies may inadvertently end up having intellectual property lost to physical or copyright destruction, and in the process make it inaccessible for like future generations in a way that like it didn't seem like that was even possible 10 years ago, but now we're on the cusp of it happening in a lot of cases, which is like the idea that the Batwoman movie was made and will never see the light of day and was, I think, pretty much destroyed is that's really crazy. That's like, and for a tax write-off, that's legitimately, it's like a red flag for capitalism, which I don't think many of the capitalists would accept. But the notion that like a movie studio would make more money by destroying something that they had created rather than actually just not destroy it.
Okay, so I'm gonna fantasize for a second. It was Warner Brothers, right?
Yeah.
So okay, so some brand newly promoted executive at Warner Brothers gets assigned some weird oversight role over the Batwoman story, and it turns out that they're like a dyed-in-the-wool Batman universe, super fan, and they show up, and it's like nothing like they expected. And they said, "Oh my God, I can't let this see the light of day. This is terrible. This is just a cash grab." I know that's not what happened, but that would be like the only way that I could possibly accept the shelving of a completed movie. It's like, wait, it's done. Just release the damn thing. Everyone wants it.
Brendan Fraser as Firefly, and I'm fairly positive it had Michael Keaton as Batman.
I mean, that seems like the coolest shit right there.
That alone.
That alone makes that's cool.
Right? Like,
so I know that it wasn't some cool ass executive who was trying to put the kibosh on a unfaithful, bad faith Batwoman story.
Yeah, sorry, it's called Batgirl, not Batwoman.
Or Batgirl.
Because Batgirl and Batwoman are two different.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But Michael Keaton was definitely in it.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, if it had been
he was
like
paid to be in it.
If it had been like the shelving of a bad faith Batgirl story, that's cool. But I don't think that's what happened at all. It just sounds like it seems like they just pulled the plug on it and it was done. They'd finished.
No, not only pulled the plug, they destroyed the film before the directors could even get a copy.
Well, that's just like
the people who actually made the film could not get a copy because it was destroyed before they were even made aware that it was happening.
That seems like a lawsuit waiting to happen, but I'm sure that there's some kind of protection from the studio.
No, it's not, because they owned it.
Yeah.
It's not. Because they own. That's the problem with that type of deal, is that there's no way that the person who made it can sue because they signed a contract that gives WB the ownership of the property, which is at the end like why they were able to destroy it without the artist or director / creator's consent, because they had given consent in the contract.
Man, this is like one of those like double-edged sword scenarios.
That's what I mean. That is a super fucked up flag for capitalism, where it was like, I guess 95% done, in that it just needed to be like complete the edited or like some of the audio sweetening, and some of the edits just needed to be finished. It was like almost completed film, and it was then completely destroyed by WB as a tax write-off, which is like, again, the idea that the government would be paying a studio to destroy something that they made is not what government is meant to do. That's like, we're at a point where our government is so out of control in terms of like corporations exploiting it to take advantage of citizens, that as citizens, the notion of like our government working to protect us seems like fantasy. But this is also, I think, why it becomes more and more necessary for people to like stop paying attention to the propaganda, but not like disconnect themselves from what's happening around them in terms of like, I know how to not contribute to Warner Brothers exploitative cycle. In the process, I know as much as I can possibly do to like counter effect like capitalism's drain on creativity, but I can only do so much as an individual. But if everybody as an individual worked toward that end as much as they possibly could, it would make an effect against the corporations, which is also why like it's not hopeless. It's just a matter of like knowing when one is acting alone out of principle or when something is like a concerted effort that might result in disappointment. But at the same time, it's like the Snyder cult was successful in bullying the studio into allowing him to finish that movie. So it's like ever so often the crowds can like use their energy to their end, their desired end. So it's like it's just a matter of figuring out how to align that energy with actual creative output and not just empty capitalist nonsense, because then you get shit like I'm not saying Spider-Man is nonsense, but in terms of like the actual contribution to culture, like Spider-Man movies aren't making culture better. They're just not. Sorry.
I think Spider-Man is best left as a comic book.
I mean, it's not to say that you can't make, not to say that nobody should be making Spider-Man movies or that Spider-Man movies are like invalid or anything. It's just not making humanity better as a whole.
Well,
it's just not.
I mean, I think that in the pantheon of comics, I think of Spider-Man as like it's definitely a kid's comic. It's for kids and teenagers. And then after a certain point, like my adult brain just lost interest in the trials and tribulations of Peter Parker, because it's like, come on, bro, you shouldn't be making these mistakes anymore. You're an adult. You're a big boy. Put your big boy pants on and quit doing this dumb shit. And then, but we keep getting the same iteration or a reiteration of Peter Parker as a young man going through the same problems over and over. So clearly, he's for a younger audience than me.
No. Here's what you're drawing, or what you're painting, is that in a prolonged attachment to the character is a sign of a stunted emotional growth. Period. You're supposed to outgrow Spider-Man.
I think that's what I mean. If you
don't outgrow Spider-Man, you're emotionally stunted. That's what I'm saying. That's what you just elaborated on is the sign. It's ultimately pointing out that a prolonged attachment to this character is most certainly a sign of stunted emotional growth. That's why literally Spider-Man movies are not actually helping humans grow. If anything, prolonging Spider-Man's ability for people to stay attached to the character keeps them emotionally stunted, which is why you're not supposed to be 40 fucking years old going out into a theater watching a Spider-Man movie. You're just not.
That's why I can't relate to Bart Simpson. I think that's the dilemma.
No, of course not. I mean, but then this is when Alan Moore says like grown men shouldn't be into comic books. I think that's what he's getting at in terms of like you shouldn't be attached to the same characters you were when you were a kid. That's a sign of emotional doesn't mean you can't read new books about superheroes as an adult.
Oh, sure.
You just shouldn't be reading the same ones you were when you were a kid. And people get that mixed up in terms of like, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be watching anything. It's just, again, like, I also don't think that
I
shouldn't be listening to Rogan anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I was listening to Rogan 11 years ago. I shouldn't be listening to the same shit anymore, which is why I don't. But there's an emotional growth that's happening with like Dave Chappelle's not emotionally growing, so I don't fucking listen to him anymore.
Like, the most complicated that Spider-Man ever gets is when he's a guest in somebody else's story, like Fantastic Four or Avengers or X-Men. But when it's like Spider-Man on its own, I always felt it was like children's programming. The most development it really needs is an animated series on a Saturday morning. That's it. Anything beyond that is like taking it too far and trying to get to squeeze too much juice out of it. It doesn't have that much juice. And it's hard. I think it's hard for that to happen. Like, X-Men is complex enough that it can be turned into a very complex and multidimensional universe. And I'm pretty sure that Avengers has been wrung dry. But they're probably going to try and give us some more Avengers again at some point, right?
Oh, for sure.
I mean, they can't help themselves.
And there's going to be emotionally stunted baby men that are going to eat it up, which is why they're going to do it.
Yeah.
Which is why it's going to make $1 billion.
Oh man, I can see it now. They're just gonna superimpose old footage of when they do the Infinity. They'll do the Infinity Continuum at some point, and they'll just superimpose old footage into the new footage, or vice versa, so that they can have different versions of it without having to recreate significant portions of it. That's my prediction for the future of the Infinity Continuum within the Disney MCU. It might not even be the Disney MCU at some point. It might become some other MCU, like the Sony MCU, or Fox might become its own company again. Probably not. I don't think anything can get out of the black hole of Disney.
No, definitely not. I mean, I don't think so.
I don't think anything would want to. Like like that's so serious. Like, deep pocket of resources that is pretty unmatched.
Well, and then this is, I think, why WB is having such a hard time getting a win in terms of, like, if that's what you have to compare yourself to, everything's going to look like a log.
Oh yeah. I mean, really,
loss after loss after loss compared to Disney MCU.
Yeah, that's like an inescapable shadow. Like, that's an unscalable mountain. Nobody can compete with Disney in the looks department or in the story department or the complexity.
But what choice do you have?
That's true. You have to go with
when DC is Marvel or when Disney is Marvel and WB is DC, and everyone is so used to contrasting the two. What choice does WB have but to be compared to?
That's true.
Disney. They have no choice. And good or bad,
the independent film industry kind of did a number on it. And they told the stories that Disney wouldn't tell, and they told them in ways that Disney wouldn't tell them. And there are quite a few independent filmmakers who have emerged over the years who have very unique storytelling. Well, some of them I think ended up in Disney. Like M. Night Shyamalan ended up making Disney movies, didn't he? So I don't know. There have been plenty of storytellers who have their own unique way of telling stories, but they don't have that, industry empire heritage that Disney has. It's just so incredible what they have to work with. I mean, they're able to turn out, what amounts to 3 movies and call it a limited series and release that in like 9 months. And they look like fully fledged movies. It's just crazy to me. Definitely one of the.
And that's kind of where.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just.
I was gonna say the difference between them and like Netflix, for example, is the consistent trajectory of the story arc, which keeps it cohesive. Because I think this is also what's keeping the Star Wars train going too. In that a lot of the older people claim that they don't watch this shit, but enough of the new properties appeal to kids that they don't fucking have to, and it keeps going. Like Star Trek too. Like I don't watch Star Trek Prodigy, but it seems like enough people do that it's like it's still going. So as long as the properties do that, they continue, which is why Star Trek has worked as long as it has, or why Star Wars has worked as long as it has. And this is where I think the MCU properties are historically better between the different studios. But I think that's where like it does seem like James Gunn is making a smart move in trying to go after the younger audience and like not necessarily ignoring the 40-year-old comic book nerd, but that's not their focus anymore. And I don't think that's like DC would have survived if they tried to compete with Sony and Disney after that fucking 40-year-old Spider-Man nerd. The 40-year-old Spider-Man nerd is not going to give anybody else their money because they're saving up for Spider-Man, and that's their big event of the year. And it's like it's Spider-Man, nothing else, and that's that fucking stupid nerd, that demographic. So WB can't fuck with them anymore, and they got to go after like some kid that might be interested in Superman now. But now it's like, well, Superman might have to be gay because gay people exist, and you can't do this shit where you pretend that like only one demographic is what the comic book can be about.
Let's for a second there, just why can't Clark be gay? Why couldn't
it doesn't matter?
I know, but why couldn't Lois have been a beard this entire time? Why how would that have changed
when they
anything?
Made Jonathan Kent gay, people got upset. So
yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Like, okay, not older people got upset. Younger people don't give a fuck.
Yeah,
older people got upset. So that's what I mean. Like that demographic that got upset when they made Jonathan Kent gay in the comic books, fuck them. They can fuck off.
How does that?
They're not going to watch the new movies anyway because they're too busy waiting for Spider-Man.
But
they're gonna say some shit on Facebook.
None of that shit would have changed like any of the things that Superman did, even if Superman was gay. Superman is still Superman. Superman's still gonna save everyone on Earth. That's part of the story.
Right. I mean,
like
I don't care. I'm not the person that cares.
Yeah, I know.
That's what I mean. Like, there were people who were really upset when they made Superman gay in the form of Jonathan Kent, or I don't know if it's Jonathan or just John.
Wait, is it Superman's son?
But it's Clark's son.
Yeah, that's John.
It's Clark's son, but he's taking over.
Yeah, I think when they say Jonathan, they're talking about Senior.
But the father, the grandfather.
Yeah, you know what? That's okay, because it is. Superman is still Superman. Is always Superman. Is always going to save the day. Like I'm hard pressed to imagine a version. Well, no, actually, I know there's a version of Superman where he stops giving a fuck and becomes real draconian about everything. But I'm hard pressed to imagine a version of Superman where he's so just put off by everyone on the planet that he just lets it get obliterated. That's a really dark Superman story if he lets the Earth get destroyed. His like
right, because even in Injustice, he needs people to like be his slaves.
Yeah, well, he lost one home. I'm pretty sure he doesn't want to lose a second planet because that'd be like Superman's PTSD is unimaginable, obviously, but yeah, I just can't imagine a version where he lets the Earth be destroyed. He definitely has enslaved humanity. That version exists. That totally exists, but like not another planet destruction one. That would probably bring about like super madness, and he would probably just kill everything. That's how that story ends. We don't want that story. That's like not actually an interesting story, because Superman going crazy and just obliterating everything is like, a powers unleashed story. There's nowhere for that to go. Things blow up all over the place on a solar system wide scale, on a galactic scale, on an intergalactic scale. I mean, eventually it becomes so incomprehensibly big that it's like, wow, he had this power stored up this whole time. Well, shit, why did it take so long? And that's the end of it. And that's not actually an interesting Superman story. I actually want to see one where he has like goes to a planet and gets like super allergies or something like that, and so whenever he sneezes, it like blows him off course really hard.
Yeah, the Superman stories have been pretty exhausted.
Like, I want to see his superpower like become something kind of amusing. Like, if he's not going to have super sneezes, then it's going to be like
they did that in Smallville, actually.
Yeah, super hiccups or something. Stuff like that. He has got super burps, like punishingly loud, like earth-shaking burps. It's like, I don't know where it's coming from. I ate some tamales earlier. They're just really messing me up.
Well, in Smallville, him and Lana got busy and it shook the house.
Of course.
But she had powers at that point, too. They gave her powers for a few episodes.
She drank some of the kryptonite moonshine that Clark's friend was making.
Yeah, something like that. Not the striped gum episode. That product placement, man. The fact that there's a striped gum episode of Smallville is like, we're in this weird timeline where advertising is everything. Like, dude, why does our military need marketing? Why does the military need marketing? I mean, I know intrinsically, but that's fucking weird. That's fucking weird.
Well, that's some like Starship Troopers level
military
shit. That's straight up,
for sure.
Straight out of the 100%. Pages of Starship Troopers. That's like that's one of Heinlein's warning signs, early indicators or indicators of a fascistic society.
Well,
They got freaking like earn your citizenship, join the military, fucking marketing, earn your place in society.
And after rewatching Starship Troopers, it's like we're far enough from it that it's amazing that people didn't get the satire.
It's brilliant. Made. It's a brilliant satire. They did such a good job that everyone took it seriously. Like,
yeah.
Oh man, I mean, everyone missed the mark, obviously, but they did such a good job. And then they afterwards,
it's so obviously satire.
But then everyone's
people didn't get it as satire. It's like, wait, what?
Well, they didn't get it as satire, and then it spawned all those sequels and that horrible cartoon, and like I think there have been like, I don't know how many there have been. There's probably like 8 freaking Starship Trooper movies by now. I gotta find out.
Have you seen the sequels?
I've seen one of them.
Let's see. Was it satirical or was it not?
No, it was serious. There are 5 official Starship Trooper movies, and I'm pretty sure only one of them is a satire. All the others are like very serious. They're gonna make there's a 2022 German Starship Trooper movies. So there's 6 of them officially. Oh, and there's the Roughneck series, which is, I think that's the cartoon. No, there's 2 animated movies and 2 animated series. There's 7 total. What the fuck? Really?
A lot of Starship Troopers.
Man. Oh, it looks like one of them was an anime from 1988. It's only 6 episodes, and it's described as
88.
Yeah, and it's described as a faithful adaptation of the source material. So okay, so I might actually have to check that out.
Does it say what studio made it?
It was made by. Does not say. Just Starship Troopers 1988. Roughneck Chronicles. That looks like animation. Starship Troopers 2, Hero of the Federation. Starship Trooper 3, Marauder. This is also this looks like it's live action. Starship Trooper Invasion. I think that looks like CGI, but it might be an anime. Does not say. Starship Trooper Traitor of Mars. This is like a Square Enix style animation. It looks like it looks like Final Fantasy from whatever 1998 or 99 or whenever that
Advent Children.
Yeah, whenever that came out. Wait, Advent Children?
Yeah, the Final Fantasy movie.
There has been a couple Final Fantasy movies, though, haven't there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Let's see.
I think,
Final Fantasy, The Spirit Within is the one I'm thinking of. That's 2001. That's the one it reminds me of. Okay, so like that's pretty amusing to me, actually.
Oh, Advent Children was 2005.
Yeah, so this movie made in 2017. The screen capture they've got it very, very. It reminds me a lot of Spirit Within. That just goes to show how far computing technology has really come. That what required the total power, processing power of Square Enix to make a movie in 2001 can be accomplished with whatever resources they had to make 2017's Roughnecks of Mars movie. Traitor of Mars. That's actually kind of cool. I'm not gonna lie. That's actually really cool. It means things have come a long way. Because I remember reading about like the resources that Square Enix committed to making that movie, and the rendering time and all that stuff, and comparison to how many computers of the day that it needed to do it in that amount of time, and how it would still be impossible without their supercomputer cluster or something like that. This stuff was all pretty cool stuff. I mean, when we compare it to the stuff that Peter Jackson accomplished, it's not actually as impressive as that. But at the time, it was unparalleled. I think they got the hair moving really, really well. And so by the time we get the stuff that happens in Lord of the Rings, I think it's in that not much far further off from that, is that?
No, but I think that's also why we end up with the Willow TV show and shit like that, where now I
Yeah,
mean, or even
they
the
came
Lord
out in
of
the
the
same
Rings
year.
TV show. It's like the CGI they invested so much in it that now it's like super accessible,
Yeah.
which is where the result then was like a bunch of CGI heavy production without writing. And that's where, on the one hand, it made the images and visuals better, but because the human element of writing was like seen as less valuable at the time, coincidentally,
Writing was
then like
practically
they leaned on
vacant.
images. Yeah, I mean the writer's strike, between the writer's strike and um like now AI writing, um executives think that writers are replaceable, and they're given all these signs that make them believe that they are, but it only works in the short term. So I think that's where it's only gonna be so long that executives try to use Chat GPT and like automate writing and shit like that, because it's not gonna work out. Like it works for a short amount of time in the sense of like,
So
what was it, South Park, that made fun of the walrus writing movies, just picking random like words.
so I watched this there's a lot of AI generated electronic music that is pretty believable, like really holy shit believable. And I watched this video. This guy was he had found a YouTube live stream of AI generated progressive metal, and he was just listening to it, and he was commenting that it sounded really good. Like he's like, "Wow, this sounds really good. That part sounds very impressive," and it and even though like everything was, everything lines up every 32 bars or whatever, where you kind of expect it to, where like the form kind of resolves itself. There is a form to it that's kind of recognizable. The one thing that he commented on is like, now why did it do that? Why did they even do that? Like almost on a level of like, as a guitar player, he's like why would that even happen? Because there are certain things that are like either physically, conceptually hard to facilitate, just conceptually hard to facilitate, let alone physically facilitate. But then it's like, why did they do that? Like, why did they choose to do this now? They were building, things like even though the AI can make it sound really good and can sound like an incredible performance, it still sounds like it's just doing stuff. It's just being instructed. I think there's still a ways to go before that stuff is. I think there's a ways to go before it can fool the musicians, is what I mean.
Oh yeah, I don't know if it'll ever be able to fool. I mean, maybe, but
I think it
this
will
is where
eventually.
it can fool the layperson, but I don't know if it, like, there may be 5% of musicians that will be able to fool, but there's always going to be somebody like in that 15% who will be able to be like, nah, this is AI generated, and that's where like it gets to this point where it can fool most of the people, but
it can fool 85% of the people 95% of the time.
Right. Yeah. Some shit like that. I was watching a video about how to. There's like AI writing detectors now, but the way you fool them is to like take the AI output and put it into a paraphrasing.
Oh, you have to run it through like a wrapper,
application,
or you have to pump it through some kind of translator.
But once you do, you can do that basically and get it to output the same content with very variation on the verbiage, which is then it can fool the detectors some of the time, but it doesn't. It's like,
I bet it's the kind of thing where if they instructed the generator to to randomize verbosity per statement on some kind of random number generator that it develops on its own, then it might be able to. But that's like it's like a self-writing recursive algorithm at that point.
I mean, and how much energy is one willing to put into it for that? So it's like, on the one hand, yeah, one could do it, but for what? And that's the issue, is like the amount of energy it takes to output AI writing that is not detectable as AI writing is actually a lot of energy, in terms of like, you can put out AI writing, but the detectors are decent enough where it's going to give you some indication. And the more energy and effort somebody puts into hiding it, the less likely the detectors are going to pick it up. But that's going to change over time too. So now that the detectors,
they'll just look for who's expending the most energy to create the statement,
or it'll like figure out ways to like look for low frequency words to say, oh, this looks like something that has been modified to be less obvious as AI because it was a low frequency word, or they're going to change up the algorithm how it detects AI writing. So it's like, whatever the people doing the AI writing detectors are doing is going to adjust with the way people are using other tools to get around it. So it's this constant like tug of war between who's got the upper hand. So right now, the AI writing people have the upper hand, but it's only going to be a matter of time before the AI detection people get the upper hand. And then it's going to go back and forth. It's never 100% in one court.
Incidentally, I've noticed that there's been kind of over time, there's been a push for less verbosity in writing, like all of the grammar scan for Word. It seems like every year it becomes, it wants writing to be less verbose.
Right. Well, because
and that's fine.
The less you say, the more concise.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fine. But I just thought it was interesting that it was happening. It's like, wow, this is. I bet if I went back in time through different variations of just Microsoft Word with the standard dictionary that's installed with it locally, no connect to the internet and update any dictionaries. I bet we would see like an actual increase in what is allowed in terms of verbosity. This is something that
well, it's true, and like. The issue is people become better with their language, but also in terms of like prose is one thing, but all writing is not prose.
Yeah, definitely.
So when in terms of like writing, when you're trying to communicate a point, unless it's a blog or a explicit piece of prose, if you can say it in 9 words, any more than 9 words is
too much.
A disservice to the reader. It's not actually, this is not the venue to use more words for style. That's not the way non-prose or personalized writing works. And that's where it didn't used to necessarily be that way, but general writing rules and editing rules have drifted towards as few words as necessary to communicate a point, at risk of running into or turning into run-on sentences, because actual written language has rules that prevent things from reaching a certain length without breaking those rules. So it's like once a sentence passes like 2 lines, it's highly at risk of becoming a run-on.
Like it's got a semicolon.
If somebody's used proper, exactly, semicolon or colon,
and then they've got loads of commas. maybe a couple
Like
dashes.
anybody who's got a sentence that's 3 lines long is most likely written a run on. And this is where again, like that notion of the fewer words the better is not just because of style. It's in this sense, it's like you are literally restricted in terms of how long you can make a sentence. But again, that's not the same in prose. Or if somebody's like writing a novel, that is not necessarily true or not even necessarily how one should approach it. But this is the difference between, like, a news story is not generally prose. So it's not meant to be, or in terms of, it's more academic or journalistic style writing than free form.
Oh, sure. Like some of the most hardcore science fiction literature. It's like the really mind-bendy science fiction literature. Some of that stuff is like 3 pages. That's one sentence. It just never ends. It doesn't actually resolve. There might be like a paragraph break so you can keep track of where you're reading. But some of that stuff just drags on and on and on. And it's because it's trying to melt your brain.
Yeah, and in the context of a novel or a prose story, that's perfectly acceptable in terms of, as long as it's done with an effect or for an effect,
well, it has to
it's not out of line. Right, it's not out of line with that form.
And then some genres beg it. Like there's all of the isolation science fiction. That stuff really, it's like built around the whole concept of a never-ending like madness, and a lot of that is directly tied to the storytelling mechanism of droning on and on and on and on. Similarly with Spider-Man, there was a time when I was really intrigued by that kind of science fiction because it seemed like it was extra dark and there's this ominous presence that emerges as you read it, and then over time it's just like, oh yeah, that's just that really big extra-dimensional being that's hanging out up there, just probably taking a nap. We don't even exist to it. We're like not even ants to it. We're like the germs that live on ants to that thing. But fortunately, that kind of science fiction has only recently entered public domain, and so the expansion of it into the visual mediums has been, a little slow, I think. There have been attempts at tapping into like that kind of dark Cthulhu energy, but for the most part, those kind of stories fail because they don't reach the scale of an extra-dimensional elder god-like monster. Like, so large it's incomprehensible, and they have to fit it on a screen, so it can't actually be that large without reducing the Earth to this thing that is just a pale blue dot. It's like the idea of visualizing Galactus. Galactus is big enough to eat planets.
Yeah, it's really hard to translate that.
Galactus to a human, Galactus is actually, in the Fantastic Four movie when they visualized Galactus as a storm, that was pretty good. That was pretty good.
I thought it was, it worked. It worked for me. Because I don't think that's what everybody wanted, but I got it. It worked. But okay, I can roll with this.
I thought, what was it? Samuel L. Jackson? Not Samuel Jackson. Lawrence Fishburne. His Silver Surfer was pretty good too.
The idea of a planet-consuming entity with bilateral symmetry that's also bipedal is fucking stupid. That's really dumb. I mean, that's really fucking stupid, actually. Like, a cloud actually makes way more sense for something like Galactus. Like, if we're going to keep it real.
Yeah.
Like, the idea of, bilateral bipedal symmetry at that scale is just fucking dumb. I love it when it's executed. I'm not gonna pretend I don't love seeing it. It's cool, but it's also fucking stupid. That's what happens when you like accept that things don't have to be intelligent to enjoy them. Like, I don't have any problem with it being stupid. I still enjoy the fuck out of it, but it's dumb as fuck. And that's okay.
Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.